You're standing at Promontory Summit, Utah. May 10th, 1869. The Golden Spike Ceremony. The most photographed moment in American railroad history. Champagne flows, men in top hats cluster around the final rail. Cameras on tripods capture everything. The dignitaries, the locomotives facing each other, the crowd, the speeches, every ceremonial hammer blow. Everything except the one thing that mattered. Imagine you're documenting the greatest engineering achievement of the 19th century. 7 years of work, 1,700 miles of track, 2 companies racing toward each other across a continent, 10,000 workers. You'd photograph the progress, wouldn't you? The grading, the tunneling, the bridge building, the track laying, day by day, mile by mile. Now forget everything you think you know about the Transcontinental Railroad, because in 7 years of construction, across 1,700 miles involving thousands of workers, and the largest engineering project in American history, there are no construction photographs. Not one, not a single image of track being laid. Not one photograph of workers grading the route. No pictures of tunnel excavation, no images of bridge construction in progress. Nothing but completion ceremonies and finished structures. The photographic record begins in 1869, not 1863, not 1865, not 1867. It begins when the track was already there. I found this absence the way most discoveries begin. By accident, looking for something else entirely. The archive room of the Oakland Museum smelled like 90 years of dust and preservation chemicals. Late afternoon light angled through high windows, catching particles suspended in air that probably hadn't circulated since the building was constructed. I'd requested the railroad photography collection, expecting to spend maybe an hour browsing construction images for a project about labor history. The archivist brought out box after box, hundreds of photographs, maybe thousands. Golden Spike Ceremony, 23 different angles. Completed trestles spanning canyons, documented with meticulous detail. Finished tunnels, their entrances perfectly framed. Locomotives posed on completed track, smoke artfully arranged. Depots, fully constructed. Stations, operational and staffed. Track stretching toward horizons, rails gleaming in perfect parallel. I spread them across the table, organized them chronologically, looked for the gaps. The gaps were everything. Do you have any construction photographs? I asked the archivist. Track laying? Grading work? The actual building? She paused in the doorway. That's the completion ceremony collection. The construction records should be in Box 47. Box 47 contained maps, surveyor's notes, financial ledgers, stock certificates, a few artist sketches. No photographs. Maybe Box 52? She suggested. Box 52. More maps, telegraph logs, passenger timetables from 1870 onward. Maintenance records, no photographs. We went through every box in the collection. 3 hours. My hands turned gray with archival dust. We found photographs of finished infrastructure dating back to 1869. We found construction photographs dating from the 1880s and 1890s. Expansion lines, branch routes, later additions. But 1863 to 1869? The 7 years when they supposedly built the original transcontinental line? Photographic silence. That's strange, the archivist admitted. We have construction photos for every other major railroad project from that era. The Baltimore and Ohio, the Illinois Central, even smaller regional lines. But the Transcontinental, she trailed off, looking at the boxes spread across the table. I always assumed they were somewhere else. Another archive. The Huntington Library, maybe. Or the Union Pacific Collection in Omaha. I felt something shift in my understanding. Not dramatically. Just a quiet recognition that I'd stumbled onto an absence that shouldn't exist. Photography in the 1860s wasn't rare. It wasn't prohibitively expensive. Matthew Brady and his team had photographed the entire Civil War, battlefields, camps, fortifications under construction, trenches being dug, bridges being built. Alexander Gardner documented everything from battlefield preparations to the construction of military infrastructure. These were wet plate collodion photographs. Yes, they required preparation and care, but they were perfectly capable of documenting construction work. We have hundreds of photographs of military construction from the Civil War years, dozens of images showing canal construction, building construction, even railroad construction for military supply lines. The technology existed, the photographers existed, the resources existed. What we don't have is a single photograph of the most significant construction project in American history actually being constructed. I sat in that archive room as the light failed, staring at the empty space where the evidence should have been. The Golden Spike Ceremony stared back from 24 different prints. Perfect documentation of completion. Perfect absence of creation. That night, in a hotel room in Oakland, I made a list of what should exist. Track laying crews, photographed in action. Grading operations cutting through hillsides. Tunnel excavation, at least the entrance work before the darkness made photography impossible. Bridge foundations being laid, trestle framework being assembled. Supply trains bringing materials, worker camps along the route. Rock cuts in progress. The daily progress of the rail line, advancing mile by mile. I made a second list of what actually exists. Finished track, completed tunnels, standing trestles, operational depots, the Golden Spike ceremony, documented from every possible angle, locomotives on completed rails, infrastructure already in place, already functional, already bearing traffic. The absence wasn't just strange, it was systematic, complete, as if someone had carefully removed every image that showed creation, leaving only images of completion, or as if there had never been anything to photograph, because the track was already there. Promontory Summit, Utah. Present day. I stood where they drove the Golden Spike, elevation 4,900 feet, surrounded by sagebrush and rust-colored earth. The original grade is still visible, a gentle cut through the landscape, smooth and precisely engineered. Wind moved through the sparse vegetation. The sky stretched enormous and empty overhead. The National Park Service has reconstructed the ceremony site. They've placed replica locomotives, facing each other, recreating that famous 1869 photograph. Tourist placards explain the engineering triumph, the 7 years of labor, the Chinese and Irish workers, the 10,000 men who supposedly built this line. I walked the grade eastward, away from the ceremony site. The earth still shows the cut, a level platform carved through terrain, 40 feet wide, extending in both directions toward horizons. The engineering is subtle but precise. No dramatic excavation, no massive fill, just a gentle, consistent grade following the natural topography with mathematical precision. After half a mile, I stopped and knelt on the grade. The substrate beneath the removed rails is still visible, a compressed layer of crushed granite and limestone, packed so densely it's become almost like concrete. I tried to dig into it with a pocket knife. The blade skittered across the surface, barely scratching it. This compression, this density, it speaks of centuries of weight, not decades. It speaks of time measured in geological terms, not the 7 years claimed in the official history. I looked east toward the Weber Canyon, then west toward the Nevada Basin. The grade stretched in both directions, perfectly level, following contours that seemed impossibly intuitive. No trial and error, no visible corrections. Just a single, confident line across the landscape. The official story says they surveyed this route in 1863. Chief Engineer Grenville Dodge and his team, working from horseback and on foot, supposedly mapped this exact path through some of the most complex terrain in North America. Then, starting in 1863, thousands of workers supposedly followed that survey, cutting and filling, grading and leveling, creating this platform for the rails. But when I measured the grade's cross-section, something I could do with simple tools, a level and measuring tape, the precision was extraordinary. The platform maintains a consistent 40-foot width with variations of less than 6 inches across the half-mile section I examined. The crown, the slight arch that allows water drainage, follows a mathematically perfect curve, the same curve every 50 feet. You don't achieve that precision with picks and shovels and wheelbarrows. You don't achieve it with 19th century surveying equipment. You certainly don't achieve it across 1,700 miles of varying terrain, through deserts and mountains and salt flats, with thousands of different workers and hundreds of separate crews. You achieve it with machine precision, with technology, with methods we attribute to the mid-20th century, not the mid-19th, or you inherit it. Already perfect, already there. I walked back to my car as the sun lowered, throwing long shadows across the grade. Behind me, tourists photographed the replica locomotives. Children ran across the ceremony site. A park ranger explained about the Golden Spike, about the meeting of East and West, about American ingenuity and determination. But nobody was looking at the grade itself. Nobody was kneeling on that compressed substrate trying to dig into it. Nobody was measuring the precision, walking the line, asking the obvious question. If they built this in 7 years, where are the photographs? And why is it so perfect? Weber Canyon, Utah, 20 miles east of Promontory Summit. The train route follows the Weber River through a narrow gorge, carved between vertical rock walls that rise 500 feet on either side. The canyon twists and turns, following the river's ancient path through limestone and granite. The railroad grade clings to the north wall, sometimes just 20 feet above the water, sometimes 100 feet up, carved into solid rock. I hiked the abandoned sections, places where modern rail has been rerouted, leaving the original 19th century grade exposed and accessible. The path is narrow here, barely wide enough for a single track. The canyon wall rises sheer above it. Below, the Weber River crashes over rocks, its sound echoing off stone walls. What struck me immediately was the precision of the cut. The rock face above the grade is smooth, almost polished, not the rough, fractured surface you'd expect from 1860s blasting techniques. No drill marks, no scoring from hand tools, no evidence of the progressive, chaotic excavation that characterizes 19th century rockwork. I ran my hand along the wall. The surface was cool, slightly textured, but uniformly so. It curved gently outward, creating a slight overhang that would protect the track below from rockfall. The curve was consistent, following the same radius for dozens of yards. I photographed it from multiple angles. I measured the radius of the curve, 47.3 feet, consistent across the entire visible section. I took rock samples from several points along the wall. The surface texture was identical in each sample, suggesting a single, continuous cutting process rather than progressive excavation over months or years. The official story claims this section took 2 years to complete. Chinese laborers lowered in baskets, supposedly drilled holes in the rock face by hand. They packed the holes with black powder, blasted, cleared the rubble, repeated. Foot by foot, they carved the shelf into the canyon wall. But black powder blasting leaves evidence. It fractures rock in characteristic patterns, radial cracks spreading from drill holes, stepped surfaces where successive blasts removed layers, variation in the wall surface, reflecting different blast charges and rock compositions. We have plenty of examples of 19th century blasting work. It looks nothing like this. This looks machined. I hiked another mile up the canyon. The grade continued, maintaining the same 40-foot width, the same gentle drainage crown, the same impossibly smooth rock wall. At one point, the route curved around a buttress of granite that jutted into the canyon. The grade followed the curve perfectly, maintaining its width and height above the river, the rock cut following the same precise radius. I sat on that curve, legs dangling over the edge, watching the river below, tried to imagine the official narrative. Thousands of workers, suspended in baskets, drilling and blasting, moving inch by inch through solid rock, somehow maintaining perfect precision across miles of canyon wall, somehow creating a surface that looks like it was cut by industrial machinery. Or I could imagine the alternative. This was already here. The route through Weber Canyon already existed, the grade already carved, the precision already perfect. And in 1869, they simply laid rails on existing infrastructure. I found a local historian that evening, a retired geology professor named Robert Chenworth, who'd spent 40 years studying the canyon. We met at a diner in Ogden, surrounded by old photographs of the area, including several of the railroad through Weber Canyon, all dating from 1869 or later. The rock cutting has always bothered me, he said, stirring coffee. I've examined 19th century quarry work. I've looked at canal cuts from that era. Hell, I've studied every major excavation project from the 1860s. The Weber Canyon cuts don't match any of them. He pulled out a folder of photographs he'd taken over the years, close-ups of the rock face, detailed shots of the surface texture, comparative images of actual blasting work from other 19th century projects. See the difference? He pointed to a photograph of a canal cut through limestone in Pennsylvania, dated 1862. This is what black powder blasting looks like. Rough, fractured, irregular. You can see the individual blast marks, the drill holes, the progression of the work. Then he showed me his photographs of Weber Canyon. This is what machine cutting looks like. Smooth, consistent, continuous. But they didn't have machine cutting in the 1860s, I said. No, he agreed quietly, they didn't. We sat in silence for a moment. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, the evening traffic of Ogden moved past. There's no construction record, he finally said. No diary entries from workers describing the blasting. No newspaper accounts documenting the progress. No engineer's notes explaining the technique. The rock cut just exists, perfect and complete, and everyone accepts that they built it with baskets and black powder and Chinese labor. He closed the folder. I stopped publishing about this 20 years ago, after the third rejection. After my department chair suggested I focus on more conventional research questions. After the Utah Historical Society declined to include my findings in their railroad exhibition. What did they say? They said my conclusions were inconsistent with established historical consensus. They said I was undermining appreciation for the achievements of 19th century workers. They suggested I was being disrespectful to the Chinese and Irish laborers who built the railroad. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, as if noticing that the evidence doesn't match the story is disrespectful, as if asking how they achieved the impossible is somehow insulting their memory. Donner Pass, California. Elevation 7,056 feet. The railroad crosses the Sierra Nevada here, through one of the most challenging mountain passages in North America. 15 tunnels bore through granite ridges. The grade climbs 3,000 feet in 30 miles, following a route so precise it seems to anticipate every geological challenge before encountering it. I drove up the old highway, following the original railroad grade where it's still visible. Spring snow lingered in the shadows. Pine trees crowded the slopes. The air was thin and cold and smelled of rock and resin. Tunnel 6, the Summit Tunnel, is the crown jewel of the official narrative. They claim it took 2 years to excavate, working from both ends and the middle simultaneously. Chinese workers allegedly drilled and blasted through 1,659 feet of solid granite using hand drills and black powder in winter, at 7,000 feet elevation, with temperatures regularly below zero. The tunnel is still in use, part of the modern rail line, but I found a maintenance access point and obtained permission to examine it during a service window. Inside, wearing a hard hat and carrying high-powered lights, I walked the length of the bore. The walls were smooth, not perfectly smooth. You could see the texture of the granite, the variations in the stone, but smooth in a way that spoke of continuous controlled cutting. The bore maintained a consistent arch, the same cross-section from end to end. The alignment was perfect, the two approaches meeting in the middle with no visible deviation. I'd brought measurement tools, a laser level, a precision tape measure, digital calipers for measuring surface variations. The tunnel's cross-section, 19 feet wide, 21 feet high at the crown, variation across the entire length, less than 4 inches in either dimension. Think about that, 1,859 feet of tunnel, cut through granite supposedly from 3 approaches that had to meet in the middle, and the cross-section varies by less than 4 inches. With hand drills and black powder and 19th century surveying, the mathematical precision required to achieve this is staggering. You'd need to maintain exact grades from both ends, account for the curvature of the earth, compensate for magnetic variations in compass readings, drill perfectly parallel holes, blast with exact charges to remove stone evenly, and you'd need to do all of this working in darkness, in the cold, with hand tools and primitive explosives. Or the tunnel was already there. I photographed the walls in sections, creating a detailed record of the surface texture. Back home, I had those photographs analyzed by a civil engineer who specialized in tunnel boring. I didn't tell him what he was looking at, just sent him the images and asked for his assessment of the cutting method. His report came back 3 weeks later. Surface characteristics consistent with continuous mechanical boring. Texture suggests rotating cutter head with consistent pressure and advance rate. Significantly different from blast excavation patterns. Unable to identify specific equipment type, but cutting pattern indicates late 19th or early 20th century tunnel boring machine. Late 19th or early 20th century. The tunnel was supposedly completed in 1867. The first practical tunnel boring machine wasn't invented until 1875. The pieces didn't fit, unless the pieces were telling a different story than the one we'd been taught. I drove down from Donner Pass in the late afternoon, following the railroad grade as it descended the western slope of the Sierra. The route switched back and forth across the mountainside, losing elevation gradually, each curve precisely calculated to maintain a manageable grade. The engineering was beautiful, elegant. Each turn anticipated the terrain perfectly. No wasted distance, no awkward corrections, just a smooth, continuous descent from the high peaks to the Sacramento Valley. But there were no construction photographs, not of this descent, not of the tunnels, not of the grades and cuts and fills that made this route possible. Just completion photographs. Rails already laid, trains already running, infrastructure already perfect. The Nevada Basin stretched before me, a vast flatness broken only by low ridges of eroded rock. The railroad grade cut across it in a perfect line, visible from miles away. A dark slash through the pale desert. I stopped the car and walked out onto the grade. The substrate crunched underfoot. The same compressed, ancient-feeling material I'd found at Promontory Summit. The width was consistent. The drainage crown followed the same mathematical curve. The precision was inhuman. This section allegedly took 6 months to build in 1868. Crews working from both ends, laying track across the desert at a pace of sometimes 10 miles per day. The official record celebrates this speed, holds it up as an example of American industrial prowess. But walking this grade, measuring it, examining it, I felt the impossibilities settle over me, like the desert heat. 10 miles of perfectly graded, precisely crowned, uniformly compressed railbed per day, using horses and scrapers and wheelbarrows and manual labor. The mathematics don't work, the physics don't work, the timeline doesn't work, unless they weren't building it, unless they were just following an existing grade, clearing debris, placing ties and rails on infrastructure that already existed. I knelt on the grade, digging with a geology pick into the substrate, 6 inches down, the compression was still absolute. The material, crushed rock, and some kind of binding agent I couldn't identify, felt more like manufactured concrete than natural packed earth. I took samples, multiple samples, from different depths and locations along this section. Later I had them analyzed by a materials testing lab. The results showed compression densities that would require machinery, industrial rollers, hydraulic presses, equipment that didn't exist in 1868, or equipment that existed then but was forgotten now, erased from the historical record, just like the construction photographs were erased. I realized somewhere in eastern Nevada, somewhere between old rail markers and abandoned sidings, that I was seeing a pattern. Not just the absence of construction photographs, not just the impossible precision of the infrastructure, a pattern of completion without creation, of infrastructure appearing fully formed, of engineering that exceeded the supposed capabilities of its era. Back home, I spread maps across my office floor. Modern topographical maps, historical maps from the 1860s, geological surveys, railroad route maps. I traced the Transcontinental line in red marker, 1,700 miles from Omaha to Sacramento, through every type of terrain imaginable: plains, mountains, deserts, canyons, salt flats, granite ridges, and the route anticipated all of it. The grade never exceeded 116 feet per mile. The curves never exceeded 400 feet of radius where gentler curves were possible. Every tunnel, every cut, every bridge, positioned with the precision of someone who knew exactly what the terrain would demand before encountering it. They claimed this route was surveyed in 1863. Teams working from horseback, using theodolites and compasses and chain measurements, mapping through territories that were still largely unexplored, through mountain ranges where accurate maps didn't exist. And they supposedly got it perfect on the first try. No major rerouting, no significant grade corrections, no tunnels abandoned because they didn't align, no bridges rebuilt because the foundation points were wrong. 1,700 miles of perfect engineering, on the first attempt, with 19th century surveying. I couldn't unsee it. The pattern was too clear, too consistent, too impossible. This wasn't built, this was found. I spent 3 months visiting archives across the country. The Union Pacific Collection in Omaha, the Central Pacific Materials at the Huntington Library in San Marino, the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, the National Archives in Washington, university special collections from Stanford to Yale. Everywhere, the pattern repeated. Completion photographs, abundant. Hundreds of images, maybe thousands. Every finished structure, documented from multiple angles. Every operational depot, every completed bridge, every tunnel entrance, framed and perfect. Construction photographs, none. Not a single authenticated image of track being laid during the primary construction period of 1863. 1869, I found construction photographs of everything else. Military railroads during the Civil War, documented extensively. The elevated railroads in New York, built in the 1870s, photographed at every stage. Branch lines and expansion routes from the 1880s onward, comprehensive photographic records. But the original Transcontinental line, photographic silence during its supposed construction, documentation beginning only when it was already complete. At the National Archives, I found something else: gaps in the documentary record. The official engineering reports were there, detailed accounts of completed work, materials used, costs incurred. But the daily progress reports, the field notes, the working drawings that should document the construction process, missing. Not lost. Missing in a pattern. An archivist named Patricia Vollmer, who'd worked there for 37 years, showed me the catalog records. These boxes, she said, pointing to entries marked with red flags, were part of the original collection when we acquired it in 1923. The catalog shows they contained field notebooks, daily progress reports, and working drawings from the construction period. What happened to them? They were withdrawn from the collection in 1947. No reason given in the catalog, no documentation of who authorized the withdrawal, no record of where the materials were transferred. She looked at me over reading glasses. It happens sometimes. Materials get reclassified, moved to different collections, transferred to other agencies. But usually there's paperwork, transfer receipts, authorization forms, something. And in this case, nothing. Just a notation. Materials withdrawn. See head archivist. And when I checked the head archivist's records from 1947, she trailed off. Nothing. The entire month of August, 1947, is missing from his log. No entries, no explanations, just a gap. I photographed the catalog pages, documented the missing materials, the pattern of gaps, and I started finding similar gaps everywhere I looked. The California State Railroad Museum, construction period materials cataloged but inaccessible. stored in a climate-controlled vault that requires special authorization to access, authorization that's never granted. The Huntington Library. 3 boxes of Charles Crocker's personal papers from 1868 listed in the catalog, but marked restricted access, conservation concerns. When I applied for access, I was told the materials were too fragile for handling, and there were no plans for digitization. Stanford University Leland Stanford's engineering notebooks from the construction period, mentioned in multiple scholarly sources but absent from the university's special collections. When I inquired, I was told the notebooks had been donated to another institution, but the library had no record of which institution. The materials existed, they'd been cataloged, referenced in historical accounts, cited in old publications, and then they vanished, systematically, across multiple institutions, with no coherent explanation for their absence. Wyoming. The Dale Creek Bridge. This was once the highest railroad bridge in America, a wooden trestle spanning a gorge, 650 feet wide and 130 feet deep. The official story says they built it in 1868, using local timber, completing the structure in just a few months. The bridge was photographed extensively after completion. Those photographs are famous. The delicate wooden framework, spanning the chasm, trains crossing on rails, suspended above the void. I hiked down into the gorge where the bridge once stood. It was replaced with a steel structure in 1876, and that replacement was eventually abandoned when the route was moved. Now only the original foundation points remain. Massive stone pylons on either side of the gorge, their bases still visible among the scrub and erosion. I examined the east pylon. The stonework was unlike anything I'd seen in other 19th century construction. The blocks were precisely cut, perfectly fitted, showing no mortar between them. The surface was smooth, almost polished, with no weathering patterns you'd expect from exposure. I measured the blocks. Each one was exactly 2.7 feet long, 1.8 feet high, 1.2 feet deep. Number variation. Across dozens of blocks in the visible portion of the pylon, every single stone matched these dimensions exactly. You don't achieve that kind of precision with 19th century stone cutting. You don't maintain it across hundreds of blocks. You don't create it in the middle of Wyoming in 1868 with limited tools and a few months of construction time. The blocks weren't just precisely cut, they were precisely placed. The courses were perfectly level. The vertical alignment was perfect. The whole structure spoke of machine precision and technical capability far beyond what the era should have possessed. I crossed the gorge and examined the west pylon. Identical stonework, identical precision, identical impossible perfection, and no photographs of its construction, just photographs of the completed wooden superstructure, already spanning the gap, already bearing traffic. A local rancher named Tom Hadley found me taking measurements. He'd grown up in the area, his family homesteading here since the 1880s. My grandfather used to say the railroad people didn't build the stone bases, Tom said. Said they were already here when the railroad crews arrived. Just old stonework from before. Before what? He didn't know. Just before. He said the railroad workers found them and built the wooden bridge on top, but they didn't place those stones. Couldn't have. Didn't have the equipment. Did your grandfather see the construction? No, but he knew men who did. Workers who laid track through here. And they all said the same thing. The stone foundations were already there. They just built upward from existing stonework. The pattern extended beyond the Transcontinental line itself. I started researching other major railroad projects from the same era. The Baltimore and Ohio, the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Southern Pacific, regional lines across the Midwest and South. And I found the same pattern, repeated with eerie consistency. Primary routes, main lines, the original infrastructure, built with impossible speed, documented only after completion, showing precision that exceeded the era's technological capabilities. Secondary lines, branch routes, later expansions, normal construction timelines, well-documented building processes, construction photographs showing work in progress, engineering that matched the expected capabilities of 19th century technology. It was as if there were two different railroad systems. The primary network, ancient, inherited already in place, and the secondary network, genuinely constructed in the 19th century, building outward from the existing framework. In Nebraska, I examined sections of the original Union Pacific route. The grade was perfect, absolutely level, across 100 miles of plains, with drainage engineering that still functions flawlessly 150 years later. Adjacent branch lines, built in the 1870s and 1880s, showed the expected variations, the corrected grades, the trial and error of actual construction. In Colorado, I found the same distinction. The original Denver and Rio Grande main line, impossible precision, no construction photographs. The branch lines, documented construction, normal engineering tolerances, Evidence of progressive improvement. The pattern was continental, systematic, undeniable once you learned to see it. The primary rail network across North America wasn't built in the 19th century. It was already there, already perfect, already waiting. And in the 1860s, they simply laid rails on existing infrastructure and claimed the achievement as their own. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, civil engineering historian at Berkeley, spent 15 years researching 19th century railroad construction before her funding was terminated in 2003. I found her through old academic publications. She'd written a paper in 1994 titled Anomalous Precision in Primary Railroad Infrastructure, a comparative analysis. It was published in a small engineering history journal. Then nothing. Her publication record simply stopped. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Oakland. She was 72, retired, careful. I measured gradients on every major railroad in the western United States, she told me. Used modern GPS equipment, precision levels, laser surveying, created a database of thousands of measurements from both original routes and later expansions. She pulled out a folder, her own personal copy of research that had never been published beyond that single paper. The original routes, what I call the primary network, show statistical anomalies that are impossible to explain with 19th century construction methods. The precision is too high. The consistency is too perfect. The alignment is too sophisticated. She showed me graphs comparing gradient precision between primary routes and confirmed 19th century construction. The difference was stark. Primary routes showed variations of less than 0.3% across hundreds of miles. Documented 19th century construction showed normal variations of 2–5%. I presented these findings to the National Society of Civil Engineers in 1995, she continued. The response was hostile. I was accused of flawed methodology, of misunderstanding 19th century techniques, of disrespecting the achievements of early American engineers. Did they examine your data? No. They dismissed it without review, said my conclusions were too extraordinary to be credible, and therefore the methodology must be flawed. She'd continued her research privately, documenting more anomalies, compiling more evidence. In 2001, she applied for a National Science Foundation grant to conduct comprehensive archaeological surveys of primary railroads looking for evidence of pre-19th century construction. The grant was denied. Her application was marked outside scope of historical consensus. In 2002, her university department chair suggested she redirect her research toward more conventional topics. In 2003, her research funding was restructured, effectively ending her work. I retired early, she said quietly, took my pension, and walked away. Kept the measurements, because someone needed to remember that the numbers don't lie, even when the history books do. The Union Pacific financial records from 1865–1869 show something strange. I found them in the National Archives, buried in boxes of corporate paperwork that had been turned over during various congressional investigations. Ledgers detailing every expenditure, every payment, every material cost. The numbers for new construction were enormous. Millions of dollars paid to contractors. Massive outlays for materials, iron rails, wooden ties, gravel for ballast, tools, explosives, supplies. But when I cross-referenced these numbers with the claimed construction timeline, something didn't add up. They claimed to lay track at extraordinary speeds. The famous 10 miles in one day record on April 28, 1869. Regular progress of 2 to 5 miles per day during peak construction. But the material expenditures didn't match those rates. I worked with an accountant who specialized in historical financial analysis. We calculated what it should cost to lay track at the claimed speeds, the materials needed, the labor costs, the tool replacement rates, everything. The Union Pacific spent less than they should have. Significantly less. If they'd actually been laying track at the claimed rates, material costs alone should have been 30 to 40% higher than what the ledgers showed. Unless they weren't laying new track. Unless they were refurbishing existing infrastructure, clearing, cleaning, replacing damaged sections, installing new rails on ancient grading. The financial records supported this interpretation. Large expenditures for route clearance and track rehabilitation, language you'd use if you were restoring existing infrastructure, relatively smaller expenditures for new grading and excavation, the work that should dominate costs if you're building for nothing. And buried in the ledgers, I found something else. Payments to archaeological consultants. 4 separate payments between 1866 and 1868. Numbered details about what they were consulting on. No names, just line items. Archaeological services, survey and documentation, followed by substantial sums. Why would a railroad company building new infrastructure hire archaeological consultants? Unless they were surveying existing infrastructure, documenting what was already there, determining what could be used and what needed replacement. The payments stopped after 1868. No explanation, just a sudden absence in the ledgers. I tried to trace who received these payments. The audit trail led to a bank in Philadelphia, then disappeared. No recipient names, no contract documentation, no deliverables recorded, just money paid for archaeological services that the official history never mentions. Fort Bridger, Wyoming, an old military post, now a historical site. In the site museum, I found something unexpected. A diary from an Army engineer named Captain Marcus Holland, stationed at Fort Bridger in 1868. The diary had been donated by his descendants in the 1960s, catalogued and largely forgotten. I read it in a quiet corner of the museum's research room. Most of it was routine daily observations, weather, garrison activities, interactions with local tribes. Then I reached November 1867. The railroad surveying party arrived today. I offered assistance with mapping and route assessment. Their chief engineer, Mr. Reed, seemed uncomfortable with the offer, said they had specific instructions about their route and did not require military survey assistance. Strange, given the difficult terrain ahead. December 1867, rode out to observe the railroad work. Found the surveying party marking a route that precisely follows an old stone causeway, so old that vegetation has reclaimed much of it. But the grade and alignment are still clearly visible beneath the growth. When I asked Mr. Reed about this, he became defensive, said they had conducted comprehensive surveys, and this was the optimal route based on engineering analysis. Did not acknowledge the existing stonework at all, despite standing directly upon it. January 1868. The railroad crews have begun work, but they are not excavating or grading. They are clearing, removing vegetation and debris from existing stonework, repairing sections where the old causeway has deteriorated. I mentioned this to Mr. Reed, suggesting it would save considerable expense to acknowledge they are refurbishing existing infrastructure, rather than claiming new construction. He became hostile, told me to mind military matters and leave railroad engineering to railroad engineers, warned me that speculation about the route origin would not be helpful to the project or to my career. February 1868. No further contact with the railroad party. They avoid the fort now, resupplying from their own depots rather than utilizing our facilities. I have ceased commenting on their methods, but I have documented what I observed. Perhaps someday it will matter. Perhaps not. But the truth should be recorded, even if it must be recorded quietly. That was the last mention of the railroad in Holland's diary. He was transferred to another post in March 1868. The diary continued for another year, documenting his experiences elsewhere, then ended. I photographed every page. The diary had never been digitized. It existed only as this single physical document, easily lost or damaged, or quietly removed. Rock Creek Crossing, Wyoming. The railroad crosses Rock Creek on a stone arch bridge, supposedly built in 1868. The arch spans 200 feet, constructed from precisely cut granite blocks. The official record claims Chinese stonemasons built it in 4 months. I stood beneath the arch, looking up at the stonework. The blocks were perfect, each one exactly fitted to its neighbors. The arch curve was mathematically precise, a perfect catenary, the shape that minimizes stress and maximizes stability. You don't design catenary arches with 1860s mathematics. You don't cut granite to tolerances of less than a 16th of an inch with 1860s tools. You don't assemble 200 feet of perfect stonework in 4 months with manual labor, or the arch was already there. I photographed every detail, measured the block dimensions, finding the same impossible consistency I'd seen at Dale Creek, examined the surfaces for tool marks, finding none, studied the mortar between blocks, finding it was so minimal as to be almost non-existent, the stones held by gravity and friction more than any bonding agent. An engineer named Thomas Bryant, working for Union Pacific in the 1950s, had done a comprehensive structural analysis of the bridge. I found his report through archival connections. Bryant's conclusion: the Rock Creek Bridge exhibits construction characteristics consistent with late 19th or early 20th century precision stonework. Attribution to 1868 construction is questionable based on engineering analysis. Bryant's report was marked internal use only and never released publicly. He'd written a follow-up memo to his supervisor. Further investigation recommended to determine actual construction date and methodology. Structural characteristics suggest advanced engineering capabilities not consistent with documented 1868 technology and workforce. That memo was marked "No further investigation authorized." I found him, or rather, I found his obituary from 2014. He died at 93. leaving behind a widow and 3 children. I called his widow. She was 87, living in a retirement community in Cheyenne. Tom never forgot that bridge, she told me. He'd talk about it sometimes late at night, said it haunted him, said he'd measured something that shouldn't exist, and then been told to forget about it. Did he keep any of his research? He kept everything. Boxes in the garage. He said someday someone would want to know the truth about the old railroad infrastructure. She paused, but after he died, men came, said they were from Union Pacific Archives, had authorization to collect company materials. They took all his boxes, all his files, everything. Did they give you receipts? No. They said it was all company property, said they'd catalog it and it would be available for research. But when I tried to find out where it had gone, where I could access it, they said there was no record of any collection from our address, said I must be confused. Thomas Bryant's life work, gone, vanished into some corporate archive where it would never be cataloged, never be accessible, never contradict the official history. The pattern repeated, again and again. Evidence document. Researchers silenced. Materials disappeared. I decided to conduct my own structural analysis. I'd hire independent engineers, use modern scanning technology, create comprehensive documentation that couldn't be dismissed or disappeared. The first challenge was access. Most of the original infrastructure is still in active use. Union Pacific and BNSF Railway own the routes. They don't grant casual access for historical research. I filed formal requests, cited academic research purposes, provided detailed proposals for non-invasive scanning and documentation. Union Pacific denied my request. Insufficient justification for access to active rail infrastructure. BNSF denied my request. Security concerns prevent unauthorized access to operational right-of-way. I tried accessing via public crossings and adjacent public lands. In Nevada, I set up scanning equipment near the grade, conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys from property I'd confirmed was BLM land 40 feet from the railroad right-of-way. Railroad police arrived within an hour. I showed them my GPS coordinates, my BLM land confirmation. They said I was interfering with railroad operations. They confiscated my equipment, told me I was being documented for potential federal charges. I never got the equipment back. The charges were never filed, but the equipment never returned. Just gone into some evidence locker somewhere. I tried again in Utah, this time with handheld equipment, documenting from public highways. Same response, railroad police. Equipment confiscated, threats of federal charges that never materialized. The message was clear: document the railroad infrastructure with modern technology, and you'll be stopped. Not arrested, not charged, just stopped. Equipment gone, research prevented. In California, I hired a commercial drone operator to conduct aerial photography of the Sierra Nevada tunnels. We'd filed all the appropriate FAA paperwork, had all the necessary permits for drone operation. The flights were blocked. No explanation, just a notice that the airspace was temporarily restricted for security purposes. The restriction remained in place for 6 months. Long after my permit window had expired. What won't they let us see? I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for any geological surveys of the Transcontinental Railroad route. Denied. Geological data, classified for national security purposes. I've requested engineering assessments from Federal Railroad safety inspections. Partially released, but all sections dealing with substrate analysis, foundation examinations, and historical infrastructure assessment are redacted. Entire pages blacked out. I've sought access to the Union Pacific corporate archives for construction period documents. Denied proprietary business records not available for public research. I've applied for research permits to conduct archaeological surveys of documented worker campsites along the route. Denied sites not designated as having archaeological significance. Not designated as having archaeological significance. The largest construction project in 19th century America, and the worker campsites aren't considered archaeologically significant. The documentary record has been sanitized. The physical evidence is restricted. The researchers who find anomalies are discredited or silenced. I attempted to publish my findings in the Journal of Transportation History. The peer review came back. Methodology flawed. Conclusions unsupported. Recommend rejection. I revised, addressing every methodological concern. Resubmitted. Second rejection. Topic outside journal scope. Recommend submission elsewhere. I tried the Journal of American History. Rejected without peer review. Insufficient historical documentation to support claims. The same documentation, surveyor's notes, engineering reports, financial records, eyewitness accounts, that's accepted as valid for confirming the official narrative is deemed insufficient when it challenges that narrative. Rejected. Rejected, not because the evidence is weak, because the conclusion is unacceptable. There are unanswered questions. So many unanswered questions. Who built the original infrastructure? When? With what technology? Why was it abandoned before the 19th century? What happened to the civilization that created it? How much of the North American rail network is inherited infrastructure? Just the transcontinental route? The major eastern lines? How extensive is the original system? What else did they build that we've attributed to more recent construction? Roads? Canals? Urban foundations? How much of our infrastructure is inheritance passed off as achievement? Why is the truth suppressed so systematically? Who benefits from maintaining the false narrative? What would change if people knew? Where are the other photographs, the missing documents, the confiscated research? In what vault do they sit? Who has access to them? What else do they show? I don't have answers. Nobody does. Because nobody is allowed to seriously investigate these questions. But the questions themselves matter. The asking matters. Even if the answers remain locked away in classified archives and suppressed research and confiscated evidence. I stood at Promontory Summit, one last time, in the evening, as the sun lowered toward the western mountains. The grade stretched away in both directions, perfect and ancient, and fundamentally mysterious. Whatever hands shaped this route, whatever intelligence designed this infrastructure, whatever civilization created this continental network, they're gone now, erased so completely that we've forgotten they existed. But their work remains, patient, enduring, waiting beneath the rails for someone to notice, to question, to remember. The tourists had gone home. The park rangers had locked the visitor center. The replica locomotives sat silent on the tracks, monuments to an achievement that might never have happened. I thought about all the researchers who'd noticed these anomalies before me, the engineers who measured impossible precision, the geologists who saw weathering patterns that didn't fit, the archaeologists who found evidence of earlier construction, the historians who discovered gaps in the record. How many of them spoke up? How many stayed silent? How many had their evidence confiscated, their careers destroyed, their questions dismissed? How many pieces of truth are sitting in boxes in people's garages, unpublished, unshared, slowly being forgotten? The wind moved through the sagebrush. The grade glowed in the last light, the compressed stone surface reflecting the sun, like worked metal. I thought, maybe the railroad companies didn't lie about building it? Maybe they convinced themselves they had. Maybe after you spend 7 years clearing and repairing and claiming credit, you start to believe your own story. Maybe the lie became truth through repetition, through official record, through the erasure of any evidence that contradicted it. Or maybe they knew. Maybe they knew exactly what they'd found and exactly what they were covering up. Maybe the systematic suppression, the missing photographs, the confiscated research, the terminated careers, maybe all of that is evidence of deliberate concealment. Maybe someone decided a long time ago that people shouldn't know about the civilization that came before, shouldn't ask what happened to them, shouldn't wonder what else they built that we're claiming as our own. The sky darkened. Stars began appearing, the same stars that shone on whoever built this grade, however long ago that was. I wondered if they looked up at these stars and felt proud of what they'd created, wondered if they knew their work would endure long after their civilization vanished, wondered if they imagined a future where their achievement would be attributed to someone else, their technology forgotten, their very existence erased from history. The grade remembers. The stone, the tunnels and bridges and foundations remember, even if we've been taught to forget, even if we're not allowed to remember, even if asking the questions means risking everything. The railroad didn't begin in 1863. It began long before that, in a time we're not allowed to acknowledge, built by people we're not allowed to name, using technology we're not allowed to study. But it's still there, still perfect, still waiting. Look at the grade. Measure the precision. Notice the weathering patterns. Count the missing photographs. Trace the suppressed research. Follow the pattern of silencing. And ask yourself, what else aren't we allowed to know? The sun set. The grade faded into darkness. But it's still there, always has been, always will be, waiting for someone to see it, waiting for someone to ask, waiting.